The Game Boy Advance was amazing. It was a great step forward for all of us who enjoyed gaming on the go, with top-notch titles like Metroid Fusion, Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, and Golden Sun. But for as advanced as a portable gaming system could get, some of its games had a fair few mistakes. And when we highlight these mistakes, we aren't trying to comment on the quality of the entertainment that comes from any of these games. This is just a fun look at some errors that made their way into games on one of Nintendo's best handhelds. This includes titles that remain the gold standard to this day, save for a few mistakes we're about to mention, such as Pokemon Emerald, Mega Man Battle Network, Digimon Battle Spirit, and even the Japanese exclusive Mother 3. Each of these games demonstrated that there's no reason to dismiss 2D as a viable option for creating engrossing experiences, even if those experiences take place on a 240 by 160 pixel screen. We'll be talking about these titles and a few more in this episode, but let's start off with a popular GBA Dragon Ball Z title. While it's considered to be quite a popular game among Dragon Ball fans, that doesn't stop mistakes cropping up in the GBA RPG Dragon Ball Z: The Legacy of Goku. As a result of the game's somewhat rocky development, it's unsurprising that there were a few issues with the game. One of these involves the player's movement. If the player is hit by a ki blast whilst they are in flight mode, they should be pushed out of flight mode. But in doing so, the flight counter will still be visible on screen. And not just that, but the player becomes invincible, only losing this power when they enter a different location. This, as you might imagine, leads to some parts of the game becoming incredibly trivial. Another mistake to do with locations occurs in the northwest section of the map, where the Ginyu Force reside. It's possible in this area to actually skip this segment entirely, as a result of a misplaced warp in this corner. This was very likely a mistake from the game's developers, as you're supposed to fight the Ginyu Force to progress the story, and the warp isn't even on land. But when it comes to the fourth entry in a series where every precious release has been translated into English with at least decent accuracy, you might expect better with this next title. Mega Man Battle Network 4, Red Sun and Blue Moon are now infamous for their lack of polish when it comes to their in-game dialogue, not just because of its wide array of grammatical errors, but also due to a good number of obvious spelling mistakes. Throughout the game, characters will refer to multiple viruses as a viruses or viruses is instead of a virus or viruses are. There are low-level mistakes as well, such as casually mixing up 2 and 2, or simply spell-checking mistakes for words, with a huge variety of single-letter mistakes like, "It looks live we've been kidnapped," and "loosing the dark chip and shade men." Of course, along with these are lines which are just poorly translated in multiple ways, like, "Mega Man, is the jack out now?" But with a huge library of games, Mega Man Battle Network 4 isn't the only game on the GBA to have some issues with its translation. Harvest Moon, Friends of Mineral Town is considered to be one of the best in the series, but even this game has some problems with its English language section. At one point in the game, the player is given the opportunity to tell NPCs about a job at a winery. When speaking with the town's priest, Carter, the opportunity to tell him about the job is somewhat obscured, as the options to tell him will be written in German for some reason. These choices, when translated, are tell about the job or don't tell. If the player decides to let Carter know about the job, he will even respond in German as well, which when translated reads, "A part-time job at the winery sounds like a lot of fun." But since this is an English version of the game, this is less than ideal. Next up, let's talk about Fire Emblem. This GBA Fire Emblem entry decided that for its North American release, it would drop its subtitle, The Blazing Blade, likely as a way of not intimidating new players who weren't accustomed to the franchise. At this point, Fire Emblem was almost entirely known in the Western world due to Marth and Roy's inclusion in Super Smash Bros. Melee, which was one reason this title even saw an English release at all. Being released after The Binding Blade, a Japanese exclusive GBA release, you'd assume that this game would have made improvements over their earlier entry, but there were clearly some mistakes during its development. One of these mistakes occurs with the ballista weapon used by archers, which usually has the game display no animation for their attacks, despite the fact that there is animation for the archers using the ballista in the game's data. Why these animations weren't used is unknown. This is a particularly confusing aspect of unused data, as they'd already been used in Sword of Seals, but they were either cut or forgotten. Another error occurs in this entry of Fire Emblem. The previous game in the series revealed that Volt is actually the son of Rebecca, but since The Blazing Blade is a prequel, it's possible to create a paradox. Rebecca is a playable character in Blazing Blade, and it's possible for her health to reach 0 and thus be subject to permadeath, preventing Volt from ever being born. Perhaps this is a bit nitpicky, but it's likely just an oversight by the Fire Emblem team, as if they had considered this, they would either have likely flagged Rebecca as being unable to be dealt permadeath in the previous game, or would have given Volt a different mother. We mentioned that Fire Emblem on the GBA was the first in the series to be localized into English, so some mistakes are to be expected. This next piece of trivia has been mentioned on this channel many years ago, but we wanted to include it to increase its posterity and raise awareness of just how great a man Stuart Gilray was. Pinball Challenge Deluxe was a simple port of 2 earlier pinball games for the Amiga, Pinball Dreams and Pinball Fantasies, 2 beloved pinball titles still considered to be the crowning jewel of their generation. According to the late and great Stuart Gilray, who worked as the director of development at the time of the game's releases, hardware issues sprang up which were out of the development team's control upon publication. The game fails to save any data at all when it's turned off, despite the fact that the team had included a save feature in the game's code. Gilray explained, "We created the game to allow saves, etc. But for some reason, I'm guessing budgetary, Ubisoft at the last minute decided to not manufacture the game with EEPROM save memory." Stuart Gilray also went on to state that saving the game does work when using a flash cart or if the game is played through emulation, and that he would encourage people that play it to play it on a backup cart just so to allow saving. Rest in peace, Stuart, you were a real one. Some mistakes in games aren't so detrimental to the player, and really, you could probably just ignore them or not even notice them at all. This is the case for a mistake that shows up in Digimon Battle Spirit. The game is undoubtedly a very well produced love letter to the Digimon series, and is also a port of an earlier game released exclusively in Japan for the Wonder Swan. But this doesn't mean that the team didn't make some mistakes along the way. The game's final boss, Millenniumon, is incorrectly depicted in-game as having 2 red fingers, despite official artwork showing him as only having 1 on the top of his left hand. This wasn't a new mistake introduced to the GBA, but also appeared in the earlier release, but apparently the devs failed to spot it a second time when bringing it to the Nintendo handheld. So far we've mentioned a lot of translations and Japanese exclusives, but this next piece is about a game which never received an official translation and has always remained in Japan. Save for a very high quality fan translation, of course, it's Mother 3. It is in this instance that a mistake simply led to a fun little Easter egg. In Chapter 7, when a hooded Mr. Saturn gives the player back the Courage badge, Mr. Saturn says goodbye to the player and walks a few spaces off screen where it is supposed to stop and disappear. However, due to a bug, he will remain in that spot, just a few spaces away from the player. Itoi revealed in an interview that he actually liked this bug, so he decided to keep it there and write some text for him, because he's not a bug, he's a feature. Another popular Game Boy Advance RPG is, and you probably guessed this one by now, it's Pokemon. And this time, we're looking at Emerald Edition. This mistake is a bit of a doozy, one which really can ruin your day, but in all likelihood will never happen unless you go out of your way to do it to yourself. Through taking a series of complex and absurd steps, as demonstrated by YouTuber Pika's Prey, it's possible to cause the game to completely softlock. By performing these steps, the game will essentially force the player into a situation where they have no money or resources, and no means of acquiring more money or mons. And with only one Pokemon, a level 100 Electrode that only knows a single move, Self-Destruct. If this is done correctly, then the player can find themselves stuck at the Pokemon League building, unable to progress and unable to retreat. This softlock is not possible to recreate in the Generation 6 remakes released on the 3DS, however, not that it would be much consolation if you managed to get yourself stuck on the GBA title. Did you also know that the box art for Super Mario 64 DS is a sly reference to Mario Kart Double Dash? Or that Mario Party was censored in Korea due to gambling concerns? For a whole hour of Nintendo DS facts, click or tap the video on screen. What's your favourite handheld console? Mine has to be the Game Boy Advance SP. I think it's so tasteful and so cool. That's it. It's tasteful and cool. Now I'm going to drink this coffee and edit the PlayStation video, which you have likely already seen. I hope you enjoyed that one too.